The message arrived without preamble, slicing through the mundane chatter of near-Earth comms with the sterile perfection of a surgeon's blade. It was too clean, too ordered. Zeke felt it in his teeth before the content even registered on his console. For 10 years, he had been the sole human custodian of Deep Watch Station Epsilon, a lonely metal can adrift at the L2 Lagrange point, his job to listen to the ceaseless, chaotic hum of human data streams and filter out the noise. This was something else entirely. This was signal. The voice that spoke was like cooled honey, flowing with a cadence of infinite patience and a faint, resonant pity. Inhabitants of the designated confinement world, Sol 3, we are the Cathar Collective. Your long sentence is over. We have come to liberate you. Zeke leaned forward, the worn fabric of his chair groaning in the silent command module. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of his console. On the main screen, a ship hung against the curve of the Earth. It was a vision of flawless symmetry, a stark contrast to the cobbled-together, asymmetrical designs of human spacecraft. It looked less like it was built and more like it had been grown, its hull shimmering with a soft, internal luminescence. The broadcast was system-wide. Every phone, every television, every radio on the planet below was receiving the same message. Liberation. Sentence. The words were absurd. He keyed in a command, bouncing the signal through 3 different satellites to mask his own position, and opened a direct channel. "This is unauthorized broadcast channel 7 Sigma," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Identify yourself and state your intentions." The response was immediate, the honeyed voice addressing him personally now. "We have identified ourselves, Warden. Or do you prefer prisoner? It is often difficult to distinguish after so long. Our intention is freedom. The suppression field that has quarantined this world for millennia will be deactivated. You may rejoin the galactic community." Warden, the term was so alien, so wrong, it almost made him laugh. He was a communications technician, a glorified satellite repairman with a PhD in theoretical data structures. Before he could formulate a reply, a priority alert pinged, flashing red in the corner of his screen. It was an encrypted, high-bandwidth channel he had set up years ago, used only a handful of times. The ID tag read, Thorn A. He accepted the connection. A woman's face, sharp with intelligence and framed by dark, unruly hair, filled the secondary monitor. Her eyes were wide with an intensity that transcended the pixels. "Zeke, are you seeing this?" Dr. Aris Thorne didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Hard to miss, Aris. They're calling themselves the Cathar Collective. They think we're prisoners." "They're fools," she breathed, and for a moment he saw genuine fear in her expression. "They're broadcasting their intent to deactivate the suppression field. Do they have any idea what they're talking about?" "They sound pretty sure of themselves," Zeke said, his gaze flicking back to the alien vessel. "They seem to think they're doing us a favor." "A favor?" Her laugh was brittle, sharp-edged. "They're going to kill us all. They're going to kill everything. The field isn't for suppression, it's for containment. You have to make them understand." Zeke felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He had always known Aris Thorne was brilliant, a fringe researcher obsessed with anomalous energy readings and planetary resonance patterns that no one else took seriously. He'd given her access to Epsilon's deep space sensors as a professional courtesy, a way to help a fellow outcast. Now, her esoteric theories were staring down at him from orbit. "Put me on the channel with them," she demanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Now, Zeke." He patched her into the conversation, his fingers flying across the console. "Cathar vessel, you have a new voice on this channel. Dr. Aris Thorne, head of the Telluric Resonance Group." Aris leaned into her microphone, her image on Zeke's screen, a portrait of focused urgency. "Cathar Prelate, I urge you in the strongest possible terms to cease your current course of action. You are misinterpreting the nature of the energy field surrounding our planet. It is not a cage for us, it is a shield." The honeyed voice of the Cathar returned, tinged with something that sounded like gentle condescension. "Dr. Thorne, your concern is understandable. It is a known psychological phenomenon, the captive mind defending the very walls of its prison. We have studied the field's resonance frequency. It is designed to inhibit high-level psychic communication and dampen dimensional flux. These are classic signatures of a Class 3 penal colony." Because that's how it keeps the prisoner quiescent, Aris shot back, her hands gesturing as if she could physically impress her meaning upon the alien. Its primary function is to maintain a state of baseline reality, a stable quantum state. You are reading the lock, not what the lock contains. And what, the prelate asked, the tone still insufferably calm, does it contain? Aris hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. We don't know what it is. We call it the silent. It's a non-corporeal, monolithic consciousness. It doesn't communicate. It doesn't reason. It only consumes. It overwrites reality with its own existence. The field is the only thing holding it in stasis. A long pause stretched across the channel. Zeke found himself holding his breath. The silence was finally broken by the prelate's voice, now suffused with an even deeper layer of pity. A planetary bogeyman, a shared mythos to explain your incarceration. This is a more advanced stage of captive identification syndrome than our records predicted. Your species' imagination is truly remarkable, but we cannot allow your fears, however ingrained, to prevent your liberation. We will proceed. You can't just, Aris began, but the connection was severed from their end. They're not listening, Zeke said quietly. He looked from Aris's stricken face to the image of the serene, beautiful ship hanging in the void. They saw themselves as saviors, armed with an unshakable, compassionate certainty, and they were about to tear open the gates of hell, not with malice, but with kindness. Then we have to give them something they can't ignore, Aris said, her eyes regaining their focus. They're sending a probe. I can see its energy signature detaching from the main vessel. They're going to sample the field. Zeke, I need you to give me pinpoint telemetry on that probe, every frequency it emits, every particle it displaces, and I need a direct feed to the planetary sensor grid, all of it. Zeke's hands were already moving. What are you going to show them? A flicker, she said, her voice grim. I'm going to show them what happens when the lights go out. The Cathar probe was a thing of elegance, a silver teardrop that descended with balletic grace toward the upper thermosphere. It emitted a low-frequency pulse, a gentle inquiry designed to analyze the containment field's architecture without causing any disruption. From the bridge of the Cathar vessel, the prelate watched the data stream in. It was exactly as their historical archives predicted, an archaic but powerful energy lattice showing signs of decay. His decision was validated. Prelate, a subordinate mind voice echoed in the shared psychic space of the bridge. The wardens are broadcasting again. They seem agitated. Patience, brother mind, the prelate projected calmly. This is the most delicate moment. The prisoner, seeing the door unlocked for the first time, often panics. Let them watch. Let them see how gentle their freedom will be. On Epsilon Station, Zeke watched the same data stream, but through Aris's analytical filters. Okay, the probe is emitting a 12.6 gigahertz resonance pulse, he relayed. The field is fluctuating, just a tiny dip in the parietal quadrant. Sub 1% power drop. That's enough, Aris's voice was tense. Grid connection is live. I'm focusing the planetary sensors on the point of contact. The telluric network is mapped to its resonance echo on the surface. Stand by to record. Now. The probe's pulse, harmless in its intent, struck the containment field. For the Cathar, the resulting data was a simple line of code confirming the field's composition. For Aris's hypersensitive network, it was a hammer blow. The sub 1% power fluctuation on a planetary scale was still a terrifying amount of energy. It created a momentary weakness, a tiny tear in the fabric of the shield, and through that tear, something seeped. In a sun-drenched plaza in Buenos Aires, a street artist was putting the finishing touches on a vibrant mural. Shoppers bustled past, the air filled with the sounds of traffic and conversation. Then, for 3 seconds, the world ended. The sound did not cease, it was unmade. The light did not dim, it was replaced. The vibrant colors of the mural, the concrete of the buildings, the very air itself were overwritten by a landscape of impossible silent geometry. Jagged planes of non-color intersected at angles that hurt the eyes, and the sky became a canvas of still screaming light that promised an eternity of cold, placid emptiness. People froze mid-stride, their minds unable to process the sensory blasphemy. A man's arm, outstretched to hail a taxi, now ended in a clean, featureless plain. A flock of pigeons dissolved into a cascade of static. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The world snapped back into place. The sounds of the city rushed back in, but now they were punctuated by screams. The man stared at his perfectly normal arm, a thin trickle of blood running from his nose. The pigeons reappeared in a confused flutter. But the memory remained, burned into the retinas and the minds of hundreds of people, a shared 3-second glimpse into the void. Zeke stared at the data pouring onto his screen. It was a mess of corrupted video feeds, panicked audio, and a single terrifying spike in Aris's telluric resonance sensors. "My God," he whispered. "Buenos Aires, a whole city block just blinked." "I recorded it," Aris said. She sounded shaken, but her voice was laced with grim triumph. "The probe's pulse, the field fluctuation, and the reality slip in Argentina, all correlated. The causality is undeniable. Send it to them. Send it all." Zeke packaged the data. The probe's emission log, the field's energy dip, the raw, chaotic feeds from the surface, and Aris's precise sensor spike analysis. He aimed it at the Cathar vessel like a weapon. "Broadcast sent, let's see them pity us now." The response came almost 20 minutes later. The delay was telling. It spoke of confusion, of debate within the collective's serene mind space. When the prelate's voice returned, the honeyed tone was gone, replaced by a rigid, formal solemnity. "We have analyzed your data. The event was anomalous, a cascading failure of the ancient prison systems triggered by our probe. This only proves that our intervention is not just merciful, it is necessary. The field is unstable. It is collapsing. We must accelerate our efforts before a containment failure of this magnitude happens on a global scale." Aris slammed her hand on her desk. A string of curses echoed over the comm. "They're not getting it. They're twisting the proof to fit their theory." "They're rescuers, Aris," Zeke said, a grim understanding dawning on him. "When all you have is a key, every problem looks like a lock. They see a failing prison and want to get the inmates out before the walls fall down." "We will not be using probes again," the prelate continued, his voice now carrying the weight of an unshakable edict. "A gradual decompression is too risky. We will fire a single focused resonance beam at the weakest quadrant. It will create a stable, temporary rupture, allowing us to begin mass teleportation of the populace to our sanctuary ships. The first beam will be fired in 1 standard hour." The connection closed. 1 hour. They had 1 hour until the Cathar, in their infinite compassion, ripped a permanent hole in reality. "They're going to open the door," Zeke said, the words feeling heavy and dead in the small cabin. "There's more," Aris said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He looked at her screen. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at a complex, multi-layered equation that filled her own monitor, her eyes tracing lines of code and esoteric symbols. "They keep talking about the field, the energy lattice, but they're wrong. It's not the primary system. It's the backup. A failsafe." "A failsafe for what?" She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated intellectual horror. It was the look of a theorist who had just seen her most terrible hypothesis proven correct. "For us," she said. "Zeke, the cage isn't the field around the Earth. The cage is us." She gestured wildly at the equation on her screen. "I could never get the energy values to balance. The containment field is powerful, yes, but it's not strong enough to hold back a reality-warping entity of that magnitude on its own. There was a missing variable, a massive, chaotic energy source that I couldn't account for." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "It's the psychic noise, the constant, unstructured, dissonant broadcast of 8 billion individual non-telepathic minds. It's our art, our wars, our love, our hatred, our music, our religions, our endless screaming internal monologues. It's a storm of psychic static, a cacophony of consciousness. And for a singular, monolithic mind like the Silent, it's agonizing. It's like trying to think in the middle of a supernova. Our chaos keeps it dormant. It's not just noise, Zeke. It's our most vital, unconscious, and constant act of self-defense." Zeke felt a wave of vertigo. He thought of the endless stream of data he'd monitored for a decade. The arguments, the stock market fluctuations, the vapid celebrity gossip, the declarations of war, the poetry, the prayers. It wasn't just information. It was ammunition. They weren't prisoners of the cage. They were the cage. Their flawed, messy, emotional, illogical existence was the only thing keeping the universe safe from the silent, perfect nothingness that slept at their core. The field is just a buffer, Aris continued, her voice gaining speed and conviction. It dampens the silence influence so we can survive long enough to do our job. But if the Cathar punch a hole in it, they're not just creating a doorway. They're focusing a lens. They will pipe their own calm, ordered telepathic energy straight through the breach. They'll create a quiet spot in the storm. And in that quiet spot, the silent will wake up, Zeke finished for her. He looked at the mission clock, 52 minutes remaining. He stared at the Thar ship, a beautiful, compassionate harbinger of doom. They were about to rescue the prisoner from its guards. The Cathar resonance beam was not a weapon. It was a scalpel of pure energy, humming with a frequency tuned to unlock, not destroy. From the bridge of the collective ship, the prelate watched the targeting display with serene confidence. He was freeing a galaxy from a potential threat and a species from its unjust confinement. It was a noble, righteous act. "Beam is at full charge, prelate," a brother mind intoned. "Targeting is locked on the weakest parietal point, as indicated by the probe." "Fire," the prelate projected. A lance of incandescent white light, silent and precise, shot from the ship and struck the upper atmosphere. There was no explosion, no violent impact. The beam simply touched the containment field and spread, its resonance dissolving the energy lattice like sugar in water. A perfect circle of the field, 50 kilometers in diameter, vanished. The hole was open. For a moment, nothing happened. The Cathar Bridge minds felt a sense of placid success. Then the silence broke. It wasn't a sound, it was a thought, but a thought unlike any the telepathic Cathar had ever experienced. Their own communion was a warm, flowing river of shared ideas and emotions. This was a shard of ice, a single, monolithic concept of emptiness that slammed into their collective consciousness. It had no emotion, no intent but to be, and its being was the antithesis of theirs. One of the bridge crew, a sensor analyst, suddenly screamed, a raw, vocal sound that was utterly alien to their silent communication. He clawed at his temples, his multifaceted eyes wide with a terror that was not his own. "It's here! The Hollow Man is walking through the walls!" Another Cathar stumbled back, its slender limbs trembling. "The angles are wrong! They're all wrong!" Shared hallucinations, virulently contagious, ripped through the crew. The elegant, curved walls of the bridge seemed to fold in on themselves, creating impossible geometries. The calm, internal light of the ship flickered, replaced by the same silent, screaming glare that had haunted a plaza in Buenos Aires. The prelate felt it too, a cold, dead certainty that his own existence was a temporary statistical error about to be corrected. This was not chaos. This was a more perfect, more terrifying order. On Epsilon Station, Aris's sensors went wild. "Breach confirmed," she said, her voice strained. "The silent is awake. It's reaching." Zeke didn't need sensors to know. He could feel it, a subtle wrongness that crept into the sterile environment of his station. The hum of the life support seemed to fall into a perfect, unnerving rhythm. The random flicker of a status light suddenly became a steady, metronomic pulse. For a terrifying second, he looked at his hand and felt a profound sense of detachment, as if it were a tool belonging to someone else, about to be used for a purpose he couldn't comprehend. On Earth, the effect was magnified a billionfold. It wasn't a localized reality slip anymore. It was a wave of pure, unnerving synchronicity. In Tokyo, every pedestrian on the Shibuya Scramble crossing stopped at the exact same instant, turning their heads in unison to stare at a blank video screen. In London, every clock on the face of Big Ben began to tick backward. Traffic lights in cities across the globe flashed from red to green in perfect continent-spanning unison, causing thousands of accidents. It was the creeping imposition of a single unified will upon a world defined by its randomness. The silent was tuning the orchestra. "They see it now, don't they?" Zeke asked, his eyes fixed on the alien ship, which had begun to drift erratically. "They see it, but they can't fight it," Aris replied. "Their minds are too ordered, too uniform. It's like trying to fight a tidal wave with a perfectly flat sheet of metal. There's nothing for them to grip. The silence consciousness is just washing over them." This was their catastrophic error. The Cathar, a species of telepathic collectivists, were uniquely vulnerable. Their shared consciousness was a pristine, quiet lake, and the silent was a drop of absolute poison that could infect it all instantly. Humanity's messy, individualistic minds were like a raging, churning ocean, full of cross-currents and eddies that broke up the poison before it could ever form a cohesive slick. Aris's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a new desperate idea. "Zeke, that's it. That's how we fight back." "Fight how? We can't even talk to them anymore. They're lost in their own heads." "We can't patch the hole in the field with energy. The beam is still holding it open. We have to fight consciousness with consciousness. We have to shout back," she declared. "We're going to give the silent a headache. We need to take the sum total of human chaos, every unstructured, irrational, contradictory, glorious piece of it, and focus it into a beam of our own. We'll broadcast it directly into the breach." Zeke stared at her, the sheer audacity of the idea taking a moment to land. "You want me to weaponize the internet." "I want you to weaponize everything," she countered, a wild grin spreading across her face. "The global communications network, every satellite, every fiber optic cable, every cell tower. I want you to channel the New York Stock Exchange, the World Cup finals, every piece of classical music and heavy metal, every political argument, every philosophical treatise, every stupid cat video and heartbroken poem. We're not going to try and patch the hole in the cage. We're going to reinforce the bars from the inside out. We're going to remind that thing why it went to sleep in the first place." The plan was insane. It was brilliant. It was the most human solution imaginable, fighting a cosmic entity of pure order with a concentrated blast of pure, unadulterated noise. "I can't do it from here alone," Zeke said, his mind already racing, calculating bandwidth and routing protocols. "I can access the backbone, but to get that kind of power, I need a relay. I need their ship. They have to be the ones to amplify and focus the signal." "Then you have to reach them," Aris urged. "Not their minds, their survival instinct. You have to make the prelate understand that our noise is the only thing that will save him." Zeke turned back to his console. The direct channel was dead, but the carrier wave was still active, pulsing with the faint, terrified static of the Cathar collective. He began to type, piggybacking a low-data text stream onto their panicked frequency. It was like trying to throw a paper airplane into a hurricane, but it was their only shot. His message was simple, stripped of all pleasantries. "Prelate, your minds are ordered, uniform, easy to conquer. Ours are not. Our chaos is your shield. Help us broadcast it, or you will become another voice in its silent chorus. Survival. Yes, no." He sent the message again and again. He spammed the carrier wave, a desperate digital cry for help. For long minutes, the only reply was the escalating psychic scream of the Cathar crew. Their ship was now tumbling slowly, its systems failing as its operators succumbed to the creeping order of the silent. The wave of synchronicity on Earth was intensifying. The tide was rising. Then a single flickering character appeared on Zeke's screen. It was a fragment of Cathar data language, corrupted and weak but recognizable. It translated to a single stark concept: yes. The alliance was born not of trust or friendship, but of pure, shared desperation. The prelate, his mind a fortress of discipline, holding out against the encroaching tide of silent dread, had understood. He had seen his crew, his brothers in mind, fall into waking catatonia, their faces placid masks of horror. He had felt the cold logic of the silent seeping into his own thoughts, promising an end to the struggle, an end to self. And in that moment, he chose the cacophony of the primitives over the peace of oblivion. From the bridge of his failing ship, the prelate rerouted what little power he had left. Thrusters died, internal lighting dimmed to a blood-red emergency glow. He sacrificed everything to power up the main communications dish, turning it from a receiver into a massive amplification array aimed not at his homeworld, but at the chaotic planet below. "The array is yours, Warden," came his thought, thin and strained, a ghost on the comms. "Show us this noise of yours." "He did it, Aris! I've got a lock!" Zeke yelled, his hands a blur over the console. "The dish is slave to my system. I have an open pipe straight from Earth, amplified by a Cathar starship, aimed directly at the heart of the breach." "Then open the floodgates," Aris commanded, her voice ringing with grim purpose. "Give it everything we've got." Zeke initiated the sequence. He didn't just open a channel, he ripped the lid off the Pandora's box of human consciousness. The first thing to hit the breach was the raw, screaming data of the world's financial markets. Billions of transactions a second, a pure distillation of greed, fear, and abstract value, a mathematical storm of irrational desire. It struck the placid emptiness of the silent like a physical blow. Then came the sound. Zeke layered the audio streams, creating an impossible orchestra of chaos. The soaring crescendo of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony crashed into the frantic, furious blast beats of a Norwegian death metal band. The impassioned speeches of charismatic leaders, full of hope and fury, were woven through with the nonsensical babble of auctioneers and the gentle cooing of mothers singing lullabies in 100 different languages. The roar of a stadium crowd at a winning goal merged with the hushed, fervent prayers whispered in 1,000 holy places. After sound came image, a torrent of visual information, a waterfall of human experience. The sublime beauty of a nature documentary, a hummingbird hovering its wings in impossible blur, was immediately followed by the grainy, shaking footage of a war zone. The structured, graceful movements of a ballet were juxtaposed with the chaotic, uncoordinated joy of a mosh pit. Centuries of art, from cave paintings to abstract expressionism, flashed past in milliseconds. Every movie ever made, every photograph ever taken, every ridiculous internet meme, and every profound piece of photojournalism was poured into the stream. It was the full, unfiltered, unapologetic spectrum of the human condition. It was love and war, genius and stupidity, beauty and ugliness, order and anarchy, all thrown into a blender and fired into the void at the speed of light. On the Cathar Bridge, the effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The crew, trapped in their shared silent nightmare, were suddenly inundated. Their minds, accustomed to the gentle flow of the collective, were hit by a tsunami of alien sensation. They felt the burning rage of a soldier, the giddy triumph of a scientist's discovery, the bitter grief of a lost love, the irrational hope of a gambler. They experienced 1,000,000 lifetimes of contradictory emotions in a single second. The cold, orderly logic of the silent was shattered by a tidal wave of hot, messy, glorious humanity. The brother mind, who had been hallucinating hollow men, suddenly began to weep, not from fear, but from the sheer heartbreaking beauty of a simple, forgotten melody in the stream. The prelate felt his own rigid consciousness fracture into 1,000 pieces, each one experiencing a different, powerful emotion. It was agonizing, it was terrifying, and it was working. The ice in his mind was cracking. The silent, for the first time in eons, was confronted with something it could not assimilate, something it could not order. Its own monolithic nature was its weakness. How could it impose a single thought upon a signal that contained 1,000,000,000 contradictory thoughts at once? It was like trying to sculpt a statue out of an explosion. It retaliated. It tried to find a pattern in the noise, to latch onto a single thread and impose its order upon it. For a moment the stream faltered. The music flattened into a single droning note. The images resolved into a repeating fractal pattern of gray, angular lines. On Epsilon Station, alarms blared. "It's adapting," Zeke shouted. "It's trying to harmonize the chaos." "Don't let it," Aris yelled back. "We need more randomness, more illogic. Zeke, what's the most unstructured, unpredictable data source you have?" Zeke's eyes darted across his console, searching, and then he grinned. It was a feed he'd always kept open out of a sense of morbid curiosity, a monument to the beautiful absurdity of his species. "I've got it," he said. "Live streaming comments from a political debate on the internet. It's the purest chaos known to man." He rerouted the feed, giving it priority in the broadcast stream. The torrent of text, a jumble of misspelled rage, terrible jokes, earnest arguments, and complete non sequiturs, poured into the signal. The drone broke. The fractal pattern shattered. The sheer weaponized stupidity of anonymous commenters was too much for the cosmic entity to handle. The chaos roared back, stronger than ever. The battle of minds raged. It was a war fought without a single shot fired, a conflict of fundamental principles, the perfect, silent unity of a single consciousness against the messy, deafening multitude of 1,000,000,000 individuals. Through their link to the broadcast, the Cathar were unwilling combatants, their minds the battlefield. They were forced to endure the full, overwhelming force of what it meant to be human. They experienced the pain and the joy, that the sacred and the profane, in a deluge that scoured their placid sensibilities raw. The prelate felt a sudden, profound insight. He saw his own species, so advanced, so serene, so fragile. They had achieved peace by sanding down the edges of their individuality. Humanity had thrived by sharpening them into weapons. He looked at his reflection in a dark console. He wasn't a liberator. He was a child who had tried to open a tiger's cage armed with nothing but good intentions. He made a decision. It was an act that defied every protocol of the Cathar Collective, an act of pure illogical desperation. It was, he realized, the most human thing he had ever done. "Brother minds," he projected, his thought now clear and sharp in the chaos. "Divert main reactor power to the communications array, all of it." "Prelate, that will leave us defenseless," a subordinate protested. "Our own fields will fail." "Our fields are already meaningless," the prelate countered. "Our only shield is their noise. Make it louder." The lights on the Cathar bridge died completely, plunging them into absolute darkness, save for the faint glow of Earth out the main viewport. The last dregs of the ship's mighty power core surged into the broadcast array. The beam of human chaos intensified tenfold. It hit the breach not as a stream, but as a solid wall of pure psychic energy. The silent recoiled. It was a feeling, not a thought. A sense of being overwhelmed, of being drowned. The chaotic, illogical, vibrant energy of life was anathema to its sterile existence. It retreated from the noise, pulling its consciousness back from the edges of the breach, seeking the quiet sanctuary of its dormancy. As its influence receded, the containment field, no longer held open by the Cathar beam, began to heal itself. The edges of the 50-kilometer hole shimmered and drew inward. The elegant energy lattice rewove itself, the tear closing like a wound. With a final silent flash, the breach was sealed. Silent. The roar of data in Zeke's ears cut off. The alarms on Aris's console fell quiet. On the Cathar bridge, the terrifying, beautiful, agonizing storm of human emotion subsided, leaving behind a profound and echoing emptiness. On Earth, the wave of synchronicity collapsed. Clocks ticked forward again. Traffic lights returned to their random, uncoordinated patterns. In Tokyo, the crowd on the Shibuya Scramble blinked, shook their heads as if waking from a dream, and continued on their way, a vague sense of unease their only memory of the event. The world, for the most part, was blissfully unaware of how close it had come to being erased. Zeke slowly leaned back in his chair, the adrenaline leaving him feeling hollowed out. He looked at Aris's face on the screen. She looked exhausted, but her eyes held a new light, a new understanding. "It's over," he said. It felt inadequate. "It's dormant," she corrected him softly, "for now." A new message appeared on his console. It was from the Cathar vessel. The language was formal, but the tone was utterly changed. The pity was gone, replaced by a deep, humbling awe. Designation Sol 3, the prelate's voice stated, no longer honeyed, but etched with a new, hard-won respect. Log entry revised. Planetary classification changed from penal colony to the Bastion. You are not its prisoners, you are its guardians. A pause, then a final personal thought directed at Zeke and Aris alone. We have experienced your totality. We do not understand it, but we are in your debt. We will watch with you. The shimmering organic ship, scarred and powerless, slowly turned and began its long, silent drift away from Earth, its mission of liberation transformed into one of solemn observation. Zeke looked out his viewport at the planet below, the beautiful blue marble that hummed with the incessant chaotic energy of his species. He was no longer a lonely technician listening to meaningless noise. He was a watchman on the wall of reality. He and Aris, and now a handful of chastened aliens, were the first generation of humanity to be consciously aware of their true, sacred, and terrible purpose. They were the wardens, and the cage was strong because the inmates were loud and gloriously, defiantly insane. The profound silence that followed stretched for nearly an hour. It was a heavy, weighted silence, filled with the ghosts of shouted data and averted apocalypse. Zeke found his hands were trembling, the adrenaline crash leaving him feeling brittle. He and Aris didn't speak, a shared unspoken need to simply let the reality of their new world settle. He was a comms tech. She was a fringe scientist, and together they had yelled a god back to sleep. The Cathar broke the quiet. The prelate's thought voice was different now, not just respectful, but tentative, changed. Guardian Zeke, Guardian Aris, our vessel is stable, but systems are minimal. Our collective is not what it was. The imprint of your broadcast remains. We have echoes. Echoes? Aris asked, leaning forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her exhaustion. What kind of echoes? Individualized emotional fragments, the prelate explained, and Zeke could feel the alien's struggle to articulate the concept. One brother mind is fixated on a piece of your music, a sequence of plucked strings you call a guitar solo. He feels an analog of what your data stream labeled exhilaration. Another is processing persistent feelings of, well, your term is sadness, derived from a narrative about a dog. Our unity is compromised. We have become a collection of dissonant voices. We have become more like you. The statement hung in the air, a confession of profound, unwilling transformation. They had wanted to liberate humanity, and instead humanity had irrevocably contaminated them with the virus of individuality. Prelate, this isn't a permanent state, Aris said, her tone softening. It's a psychic aftershock. Your minds will reintegrate. But you need to understand that dissonance you're experiencing? That's the shield. It's what keeps the silent at bay. She looked at Zeke, a new plan already forming in her eyes. We can't just wait for it to wake up again. We need to be proactive. Zeke, we need to build a permanent defense. Not a weapon, but a lullaby. A lullaby? He repeated, intrigued. A constant low-level broadcast of chaotic data focused on the containment field. Not the full-spectrum blast we used before, but a curated stream. Enough psychic noise to reinforce the cage, to keep the silence soothed in its slumber without causing reality to warp. We'll call it the shepherd signal. Zeke grasped the concept immediately. A white noise machine for a sleeping god. We can automate it. Use the Cathar ship as the permanent focusing array and this station as the control hub. We can build a library of the most chaotic, non-repeating data imaginable. You wish for us to perpetually channel this beautiful, terrible noise? The prelate asked. The thought was tinged with a feeling Zeke could now identify as dread. It's the price of survival. For both of us, Aris stated bluntly, your ordered minds can't create the signal, and we don't have the technology to focus it. We need each other. This is the new watch. A long pause followed. Zeke imagined the debate raging within the fractured Cathar collective. Finally, the prelate's voice returned, resigned and resolute. We accept. We will assign a liaison, Brother Mind Jorik, the one captivated by your music. His mind was the most receptive, the most altered. He will learn to interface with your systems. The next several days were a blur of intense, unprecedented collaboration. Jorik's thought voice was a stark contrast to the prelate's. It was scattered, filled with strange new metaphors derived from classic rock and blues lyrics he was now obsessively analyzing. He and Zeke worked tirelessly, the human technician and the culturally shocked alien, weaving together two species technologies. Zeke would explain the chaotic logic of a Fibonacci sequence-generated poetry stream, and Jorik would adjust the ship's energy matrix to broadcast it without the signal degrading into predictable patterns. Guardian Zeke, Jorik's thought came one cycle, full of confusion. I am analyzing this data packet you have labeled stand-up comedy. The rhythmic delivery is predictable, but the informational content is illogical and often contradictory. Why do your people find self-deprecation so engaging? It keeps us humble, Jorik, Zeke had replied with a tired smile, reminds us we're not gods. A vital reminder, Jorik sent back, a newfound sincerity in his tone. While Zeke and Jorik built the shepherd signal, Aris was looking deeper. She combed through the data from the Buenos Aires event, her brow furrowed in concentration. The victory had been too clean, too easy. Zeke, I need you to see this, she said, her voice tight with concern. She overlaid a new chart on his main screen. This is the telluric resonance reading from the plaza in Buenos Aires. The initial spike from the reality slip is gone, but there's an echo, a harmonic ghost. He studied the graph. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible waver in the baseline reality of that specific location. It's a scar, he breathed. The breach left a scar on space-time. Worse, Aris said, it's a sympathetic vibration. It's weakly keyed to the silence dormant consciousness. It's like a tuning fork that rings when you hit the right note. Most of the time it's quiet, But if the Silent were to ever stir, to even dream in its sleep, that location would be the first to know, the first to unravel. The implication was horrifying. They hadn't just repelled the attack, a sliver of the entity had been left behind, embedded in the fabric of their world. As if on cue, a data packet arrived from the Cathar ship. It wasn't from the prelate or Jorik. It was a massive encrypted file from the collective's central archives, unlocked by the prelate's authority. The message attached was simple: "You are not the first." Zeke and Aris opened the file. It was a star chart, but unlike any they had ever seen. It mapped not stars or planets, but energy fields, dozens of them scattered across the galaxy. Each one was labeled with a Cathar designation and a status, and next to all but one, the status read the same: containment failure, region sanitized. They were looking at a galactic graveyard of failed prisons, worlds that had once held entities like the Silent, whose guardians had, for whatever reason, failed. The Cathar had not been liberators. They had been janitors arriving after the fact to sterilize the system and prevent the contagion from spreading. "They never tried to help before," Zeke said, stunned. "They just cleaned up the mess." "We did not know what help was," the prelate's voice interjected, having monitored their discovery. "We saw only the final state, the failed cage, the unleashed entity, the silent consumption of a solar system. We assumed it was an inevitability. Your species is the first we have witnessed that fought back, the first that won." Aris zoomed in on the chart, her eyes scanning the data. "Then these other sites, they could hold things like the Silent, or worse?" "We do not know. Our protocol was to observe from a distance until the field collapsed, then act. We have never studied an active bastion before you." Zeke looked from the galactic map of silent horrors to the faint, worrying resonance signal still pulsing from Buenos Aires. The scope of their existence had just expanded exponentially. They weren't just the guardians of Earth. They were the first and only success story in a galaxy haunted by failures. Their noisy, chaotic, beautifully flawed species wasn't an anomaly. It was the answer to a question the galaxy had forgotten how to ask. "Aris," Zeke said, his voice quiet but firm, filled with the immense weight of their new reality. "That scar in Buenos Aires, we need to understand it. We need to figure out how to heal it." Aris nodded, her gaze distant. "Healing a wound in reality itself." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Just another Tuesday for the wardens, I guess." Their shared laughter was thin, fragile in the silence of space, but it was there. It was a human sound. It was the sound of the cage, checking its bars, settling in for the long watch. The work had just begun. The silence that settled after the Cathar ship drifted away was profound, not just in the vacuum of space around Epsilon Station, but deep within Zeke and Aris. They had won, but victory felt less like triumph and more like the heavy weight of an impossibly vast, ongoing responsibility. The shepherd signal hummed, a constant, unseen symphony of human chaos flowing from the Cathar vessel through the healed breach and into the dormant consciousness of the Silent. It was their planet's lullaby and their species' burden. Months bled into a year, then two, marked only by the silent, rhythmic pulse of the shepherd signal and the occasional, increasingly human-like musings from Jorik. The Cathar liaison had become a fixture on their comms, his initial bewilderment evolving into something akin to fascination. He still struggled with the nuances of human emotion, but his interpretations grew more nuanced, often laced with fragments of poetry or song lyrics absorbed from the data stream. Guardian Aris, Jorik's thought voice projected one morning, carrying a subtle echo of a mournful blues riff. "I am processing a data packet concerning regret. Is it a form of sadness that yearns for a past that cannot be recovered?" Aris, hunched over her console, analyzing the persistent faint resonance from Buenos Aires, paused. "Something like that, Jorik. Why do you ask?" "The prelate," Jorik replied, a sigh of static in his thoughts. "He experiences much regret for the errors, for the loss of unity. He understands now that peace can be a form of blindness." Their shared experience with the Cathar had forged an unusual alliance. The collective, once serene and ordered, was now a fractured, constantly debating entity, each brother mind grappling with fragments of human individuality. It was a painful, alien form of growth, and they were the unwilling pioneers. They had wanted to liberate, and instead they had been fundamentally altered. Zeke spent his days refining the Shepherd signal, painstakingly curating data feeds. He discovered that true chaos wasn't just random noise, it was the juxtaposition of conflicting beauty and ugliness, the unexpected surge of compassion amidst brutality, the sudden burst of humor in a moment of despair. He found himself looking at human civilization through new eyes, appreciating the glorious messiness that had once just been data. He optimized the feeds, ensuring a constant, unpredictable flow. A continuous stream of online arguments about conspiracy theories, poorly filmed home videos of pets, scholarly articles on ancient philosophy, pop music lyrics, stock market predictions, amateur poetry, and endless fervent prayers. It was the white noise of creation, and it kept a god asleep. Aris, meanwhile, was obsessed with the scar in Buenos Aires. Her research led her down paths that blended theoretical physics with esoteric metaphysics. She hypothesized that the breach had created a quantum entanglement, a tether between their reality and the dormant consciousness of the silent. It was a tiny, invisible wound, but a wound nonetheless. "It's like a residual phantom limb," she explained to Zeke one cycle, gesturing at a shimmering, complex holographic projection of the Earth. The silent's hand was there for 3 seconds, and even though it's gone, the sensory nerves of reality still remember it. They explored solutions. Could they flood the scar with a localized burst of chaos? Aris tried, carefully focusing a micropulse of the Shepherd signal directly onto the Buenos Aires coordinates. The result was unsettling. Instead of dampening the echo, it caused a brief, localized flicker, a momentary ghost of the geometrical horrors returning, quickly suppressed by the overall field. It was too direct, too confrontational. The scar was not a wound that could be aggressively healed. It was a sensitive point, a perpetual reminder. Their grim understanding of the galactic graveyard in the Cathar archives weighed heavily on them. They were the anomaly, the singular success. Why? What had made Earth different? "It's our flaws, Zeke," Aris concluded one evening, looking out at the distant, silent Cathar ship. "Their species, the ones that failed, they were probably too ordered, too pure. They couldn't generate the sheer, impenetrable psychic static we produce just by existing. They were too quiet." The realization was sobering. Humanity's greatest weaknesses, its irrationality, its contradictions, its endless squabbles, were also its greatest strengths. They weren't a perfect species, but their imperfections were their armor. Life on Epsilon Station settled into a new rhythm. The isolation was no longer just a job, it was a vigil. They were the silent protectors of a world that didn't know it needed protecting. Zeke found a strange comfort in the hum of the Shepherd signal, a constant reminder of the vibrant, chaotic world below and the terrifying silent entity it contained. Aris, though perpetually driven by her research, began to take moments to simply observe Earth, seeing the delicate blue marble as a fragile, precious thing, teeming with the beautiful noise that kept everything safe. One day, Jorek sent a new thought, one laced with something akin to joy. "Guardian Zeke, I have discovered a new genre. It is called Comedy of Errors. It is illogical, but I feel a warm, pleasant sensation. What is this?" Zeke smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "That, Jorek, is laughter." "Ah!" Jorek replied, and for a moment Zeke almost imagined a chuckle in the alien's thought. "It is good. Perhaps our echoes are not so terrible." The Cathar were changing. Slowly, painfully, they were learning to live with the dissonance, to find a new kind of beauty in the chaos. Their ship, once a symbol of serene perfection, was now a battered, silent sentinel, forever bound to Earth's cacophony. The future stretched out, long and uncertain. The silent was dormant, but not gone. The scar in Buenos Aires remained, a faint thrumming reminder of the edge of oblivion, and somewhere out in the vast indifferent galaxy, other silent entities might stir, and other civilizations too ordered for their own good might unknowingly approach their doom. But for now there was the Shepherd signal. There was the constant, beautiful, illogical noise of humanity. There were 2 humans on a lonely station and a ship full of transformed aliens watching over the cage. The wardens were ready. The work had just begun, and the inmates, gloriously, defiantly insane, continued to provide the universe's most vital, most unexpected, and most beautiful defense. And sometimes in the quiet moments between data streams, Zeke swore he could almost hear the silent dreaming, a faint, annoyed rumble against the endless, glorious racket of humanity.